Good morning, everybody, and thank you for inviting me to this intriguing conference and to this distinguished panel. I will dedicate my presentation to the question of Iran's outreach in the Middle East before and during the Arab Spring, what we call the Arab Spring, which becomes quite wintry. Now, in order to start approaching the issue of Iran's so-called strive for hegemony in the Middle East, we need first to answer two preliminary questions. What is hegemony in the Middle East and who wields such hegemony? Without plunging too deeply into Marxist or Gramscian theories, I would suggest here that a single country may be considered as hegemony if it has enough power to influence the way other countries behave. States that were hegemonies, like the British Empire in the mid-19th century, had extraordinary influence on many other countries. Their partial or total control of other countries was either obtained through a show of military force or through control of trade industries. Drawing on this definition, it is quite easy to argue that no Middle Eastern country, nor even an Axis or an inter-Arab organization like the Arab League, wields hegemony. In the past, the West had adopted a superficial Oriental attitude that has considered the Middle East as one monolithic bulk, stretching from Iran through Turkey to Morocco in the West. And if it was President Bush who wanted to extend its borders to the countries like Afghanistan and Pakistan, the latest developments in the Middle East have proven once again that monolithic Middle East is an illusion. There are states where people speak Arabic and share a more or less similar culture. There are countries that speak Persian and Turkish. There are rich countries and extremely poor ones. There are different ethnicities that are not Arabs, Arabs that are not Muslims, and a variety of Muslim entities that do not see eye to eye with each other. This colorful mosaic is not glued together very well. From time to time, there are coalitions, axes, or alliances that are created to achieve an ad hoc goal. However, it is rare, even among neighbors like the Gulf states, to find the kind of fraternity that is needed to establish a monolithic, long-standing alliance. One striking example is the less than cordial relations between Qatar and Saudi Arabia, and Bahrain, or Kuwait and Iraq. Now, given the current events in the Middle East, what we have now couldn't be depicted even as a mosaic. It is a sieve held together by imagination rather than by interests. Egypt may or may not play a leading role. The Maghreb has never been considered as a leading entity. Saudi Arabia realizes that its impact can be effective primarily on local communities in Afghanistan or in Yemen. And what about Syria? Indeed, what about Syria? Well, hegemony in this state of affairs is meaningless. Before talking about Iran, I would like to add another observation. While states and even great powers don't wield hegemony, it is trends and ideologies that are competing for hegemony. It is not Pakistan or Iran that we fear. It is Islam. It is not Ahmadinejad that makes us tremble. It is the Islamic Revolution. We are afraid of Shiites because they connote with the Islamic Revolution, although Sunnis had carried out the September 11th attacks. And we are afraid of the Muslim Brothers or Hamas because of what we assume that their ideology may become the new hegemony. This fear is nurtured by the assumption that ideologies and not interests are dictating those states' behavior. This assumption drives us to believe that some of those states behave irrationally and that they prefer to cling to their assumed ideology and commit political suicide rather than comply with what is rational in the eyes of the West. According to this assumption, I would argue that even Israel is an irrational state, along with Turkey, Venezuela, Greece, Afghanistan. All of them are driven by some ideology. All of them are behaving at some time or another in an assumed irrational fashion. So if hegemony is overrated, how can we define Iran's behavior? If in colonial times, and up until the 70s, states were looking for control, the new balance of powers has changed this aspiration from control to excess, from direct occupation to influence, and from hegemony to favorable treaties. Iran is no exception. Let us consider Iran's outreach in the Arabic Middle East. For now, Iran has three strategic outposts. They are Iraq, Syria, and Lebanon. It has access to Hamas and trade with most Middle Eastern countries. However, it is the EU, China, Brazil, and Turkey that are Iran's biggest trade partners, while Middle Eastern countries rank quite low in Iran's trade partnership list. Farther yet, when considering Iran's outposts in Syria and Lebanon, Iran itself is quite suspicious about the viability of these two bases given the situation in Syria. Common wisdom has it that if Assad's regime falls, so does Hezbollah's leverage in the political situation in Lebanon, and with them, Iran's access will disappear. This assumed equation is familiar to Iran as well. However, this is not the only possible scenario. A few weeks ago, it was reported that some Syrian dissidents who live in France held a meeting with Iranian diplomats in Switzerland to discuss the possibility that Iran would abandon Assad's regime, and in return, the new regime will guarantee Iran's interests in Syria and Lebanon. Sometime later, Iran started to issue declarations against the usage of force against civilians in Syria. It should be noted that these declarations came, among others, from Ahmadinejad himself, while the supreme leader, Ali Khamenei, stuck to his support of Assad. Reports from Iran claim also that the Iranian regime is in the process of analyzing its options in Syria, preparing for a possibility of a regime's collapse in Syria. Syria comes with a great cost to Iran. By now, Iran has already lost an important ally that until 3 months ago was an avid supporter of Assad, Turkey, that was tagged in the West as a partner in the new axis of evil that combined Iran, Iraq, and Syria, has become a staunch critic of Assad, and Erdogan has decided to cut off all official contacts with the regime and to consider to impose sanctions on Syria. Thus, while Syria still demonstrates its loyalty to Assad, while Iran, still demonstrates its loyalty to Assad, it will soon have to weigh its prospects to keep its outposts in Syria and Lebanon if it decides to stick still with Assad. Iraq, which is perceived to be a proxy of Iran's foreign policy in the Middle East, fears that Assad's collapse and the Sunni takeover in Damascus may entail a new wave of Sunni uprising in Iraq, especially in the western areas of Anbar, which may then threaten the shaky regime in Baghdad. It is therefore only rational that Iran would open inroads into Syrian opposition, not only to guarantee its access to Syria in case the opposition takes over, but perhaps more importantly, to protect Iran that fell into its hands like a ripe fruit after an American withdrawal. Will Iran cooperate with the Sunni regime in Syria? Iran, it should be remembered, especially by those who like to talk about the threat of a Shiite crescent, is not too picky about its allies' religious beliefs, as long as they serve her interests. The Sunni Hamas and the Sunni Turkey, as well as the Sunni Qatar, can testify to that. The Western, and for that matter also the Israeli, premise that the fall of Assad will mean the collapse of Hezbollah may also turn out to be a wishful thinking. Even if the military supply line through Syria is cut off, at least shrink, Hezbollah will still wield enough capabilities to impose its political will over any Lebanese government, thus maintaining Iran's foothold in Lebanon. I would argue also that it is too easy to attribute Hezbollah's power in Lebanon only to its capability to drag Israel into war in Lebanon. However, this is not the issue today. It will be the issue of tomorrow. While the Syrian and the Lebanese arenas are still murky, other Middle Eastern fronts are not less challenging from an Iranian point of view. The Gulf states expose a patchwork of policies towards Iran, while Saudi Arabia is a bitter and a powerful rival, one that competes fiercely over access and influence in the Muslim countries of East Asia and the Caucasus, and fears Iran influence in its neighborhood. Qatar demonstrates a different approach. Borrowing from Turkey's zero problems with the neighbors policy, Qatar is the ultimate representative of the policy. While Saudi forces occupied Bahrain to help it crash the Shiite uprising, Qatar was having an affair with Iran. Likewise, United Arab Emirates had no problem in clashing with Iran over the Big Tomb and the Lesser Tomb Islands, while in the same time to let Iran open thousands of companies in Dubai and elsewhere in the Emirate. Friends from Dubai told me that to know Russian and Farsi is more important now for doing business in the Emirates than Arabic or English. That said, Iran is perceived as a menace, not so much because of its nuclear infrastructure or the capability that it will develop nuclear weapons, as much as it is from its perceived capability to cause havoc and topple regimes. However, the fact is that Saudi Arabia is more concerned from radical homegrown organizations, Sunnis by the way, than from Iranian involvement in its affairs. Even Iran's deep involvement in Iraq is for a large extent balanced by Saudi Arabia involvement in economic influence in the Sunnis and Kurdish areas of Iraq. An involvement which is a matter of concern for Iran, although in case Assad regime falls, as Iran claims, and it's probably right that Saudi Arabia finances the Syrian opposition. Last but not least is Iran's outreach toward Egypt. Already at the time of Mubarak, Iran was trying to rehabilitate its relations with Egypt. Egypt was not very reluctant, although it had its conditions for this rehabilitation. Iran then was willing to comply. However, the American pressure had played a major role in Mubarak's refusal. After he was toppled, Iran was quick to renew its efforts, and it was received with a more favorable Egyptian approach. Iran has never been Egypt's enemy and has never had enmity against Egypt. There have been diplomatic relations between Iran and Egypt through their interest sections since 1994, and I was quoting now Nabil al-Arabi, the then foreign minister, later to become the Secretary General of the Arab League. Yet the Egyptian interim regime is not in a hurry to shake hands with Iran. American pressure aside, Egypt still refers to Iran as a suspected country that rightly or wrongly wishes to meddle in her affairs and in Middle Eastern affairs. Interestingly, it should be noticed that, like in the case of Turkey, Iran does not care much about other countries' relations with the US or Israel. It does not condition its relations with Egypt or with Turkey on breaking their relations with Israel. Here again, Iran proves its realpolitik attitude and its realization that exporting the Islamic Revolution is not a very popular agenda, and that it is adjusting itself to the notion that the Arabic Middle East is still a members' club where Iran is not a welcome candidate. Given all that, I would argue that an anti-Iran sentiment in the Middle East is prevailing for now as part of the hegemonic discourse. If we are to generalize and to map the major elements of this discourse, we can say that it hangs on 5 main pillars. First, anti-American involvement in internal affairs, be it political, social, or even economic affairs. Second, rejection of religious radicalism while defining locally accepted religiosity. Third, retreat from pan-Arabism to state individuality. Fourth, accepting the Arab-Israeli conflict and the state of Israel as permanent fixtures in the area. And 5, suspecting Iran and dealing with it with extreme caution. These elements leave little room for Iran maneuvering, let alone imposing its hegemony. In so much that even the term Islamic bomb, meaning an Iranian bomb, has lost its attraction, and nuclear Iran is perceived as a menace to the Arabic Middle East as much as the Israeli nuclear capabilities. While Iran's bid for hegemony, unrealistic as it may be, plays a role in the Middle Eastern strategic calculations, it is important to examine Iran's internal politics in order to draw some conclusions for future perspective. Internal conflicts between Ahmadinejad and Ali Khamenei are very interesting to watch and follow. However, in spite of the harsh criticism from the parliament and the blows that he has received from Khamenei, it is not likely that Ahmadinejad will not complete his tenure as president in 2013. Given the current mood in the opposition and Mousavi's observation that under the current conditions it is not worthwhile even to participate in the general elections, major changes are not likely to take place in the parliament. I should add here that the conclusive results of the Tunisian, Egyptian, and the Libyan revolutions, the inconclusive results of the Tunisian, Egyptian, and the Libyan revolutions, and the ongoing clashes in Syria and Yemen might also play a role in the Iranian opposition's reaction. Hence, any anticipation for a dramatic foreign policy change in Iran is premature, especially since the supreme leader and not the parliament directs Iran's policy. However, we should ask ourselves what is our real concern about Iran? Is it its military plus nuclear capability, or is it its motivation to use these resources? Let us be frank. Democracy in Iran is not the main trigger of the West policy towards Iran. The West was very happy with the Shah as it was very happy with his father before him. We have seen no international mobilization to support a green revolution in a tangible manner or any kind of urgency to deal with the human rights issues in Iran. It is the nuclear threat that mobilizes the international energies to block Iran from materializing its ambitions. For that matter, a regime change will not necessarily produce the wished-for result. Drawing on reformists and liberals' articulations, it seems that nuclear capabilities is one of the common denominators that binds reformists and conservatives, liberals and ayatollahs. It is a national pride, not a religious one. They hope that current and future sanctions will make a difference and will ignite a civil revolution that will change Iran's foreign policy is far from being realistic. Demonstrations have broken out in the streets to protest against the rigged elections and the corruption of the regime, not because of the sanctions or against the nuclear policy. Then there is the military action against Iran as the ultimate solution. However, we should ask ourselves if the price in human lives in Iran and in the neighborhood countries is not of a concern, and if the targets are known and the capabilities to destroy Iran nuclear centers are there, why beating around the bush? Why not attack and relax? The answer is that we do not know if and how long it will take Iran to develop nuclear and military capabilities. We do care about human price of such an attack, and we are not sure that a military attack will destroy all or most of Iran's nuclear sites. And if, by mistake of course, an aircraft will miss its target and drop a bomb on Khamenei's residence, do we know what kind of a leader or a regime will replace him? We can tell that as much as we can tell what kind of regime will rule Libya, Yemen, or even Egypt. This is why it is so important to understand not just what the West wants, but also what Iran wants. Whoever follows the Iranian official discourse will find that the term respect is one of the key words that are used in the official vocabulary. Respect has many venues, but the definition that I like most is the one given by Dr. David Matsumoto, a professor of psychology in San Francisco State University, who said, respect is what is afforded to others when we recognize, understand, and even appreciate another person's worth from that person's perspective. To complete this definition and my presentation, allow me to quote Tom Friedman of the New York Times, who wrote in 2003, and I quote, "If I have learned one thing covering world affairs, it is this: the single most underappreciated force in international relations is humiliation. Maybe it is time that before launching missiles and send aircrafts to Iran, we should try to understand how respect is spelled in Farsi. Thank you very much.